Thank everybody for joining us again for INTERPHEX Live. So today we're going to be talking about creating a sustainable public health supply chain against the backdrop of what's been happening here in the last 18 months. I think we got a lot to talk about. And fortunately, we were able to put together a terrific panel. We have Ed Kelley. Ed is the Chief Global Health Officer at ApiJect. He recently left his position where he worked for the World Health Organization as Director of Integrated Health Systems, where he helped head organizations' COVID-19 response and created a WHO public-private collaboration working directly with pharma and med devices and, to get to the patient safety aspect. So that's going to, key piece there. We also have Rob Roy. Rob comes to us from IPS, or our affiliate company, which Somatech that is. Anyway, 35 years, subject matter expert in engineering qualification, application. He has an unbelievable amount of background in aseptic technology. He's my go-to guy when I'm working with folks on sterile process, really the best around. Jim Fraze is a success-based executive. Jim has got 25 years of experience building medical device and diagnostic companies from a sales and marketing standpoint and external validation. Jim became CEO of RX360 in February of 2018 as a way of fulfilling his personal lifelong commitment to patient safety. Very, very nice, Jim. Thank you. And finally, we have Paul Fisher. Paul also has 25 years of experience in design and management and delivery of complex facility design. Paul also comes to us from IPS, top of the line engineering, and he will be talking about development of project master plans and concept design, stuff like this is where he comes from. And today, what we will be talking about, obviously, is public health supply chain in an environment. Our panelists are going to share their insights on how stakeholders can maintain a robust and resilient supply chain essential for global health and vaccine security. I think a lot of people, we're going to touch on a lot of aspects that people seem not to understand fully in the vaccine distribution. Vaccine security with accelerated response time to meet the needs of current and future pandemics. I think, after SARS, we didn't think this was going to happen again. Well, think again. The building blocks for this supply chain resilience include tech transfer, designing right-sized capacity, improving operational efficiency, implementing state-of-the-art technologies, establishing regulatory quality systems, establishing things that maintain a solid supply chain. In a lot of cases, I think the public suffers from this, that maybe we don't understand the aspect. I mean, it's not only making a vaccine, it's getting the vaccines out. And I think that's where a lot of misunderstanding is. So Ed, let's start off by asking the simple question. In a pandemic, we are hearing many stories of disrupted supply chains. We've heard this, the media is all about it, and disrupted health services. How really disrupted were supply chains and health services, and where were the biggest problems during this last event?
Well, first of all, it's great to be here. Thanks, Russ, and fantastic. ApiJect's really pleased to be part of INTERPHEX, and I, as you mentioned, recently left the World Health Organization to be working with ApiJect because felt, one, we needed a quicker, faster, better way to get the vaccine out, and two, that this was a chance to really rethink how we do immunization and vaccination. Before COVID hit, we actually still were not reaching our goals, and now we're going to be even farther from them. So that has a lot to do with the supply chain question. I came across this in getting ready for our session today, came across this one of many, many, many cartoons out there on supply chains, bizarrely, during the pandemic, where it's a guy standing up just like this in clearly a brand meeting with his team, his marketing team, saying, look, we're team, and he's on Zoom, and everyone's like, we are here saying, team, we're updating our brand promise from inspiring delicious moments of refreshing togetherness to in stock sometimes. So, I mean, anyway, this kind of stuff has been affecting all sorts of parts of the economy. So if we just take the disruptions as they occurred, first, I think we need to back up a little bit for people and just say that a supply chain is these days not just this linear chain. It's a network of organizations, and these networks are really where businesses are obviously cooperating across to produce this commodity. But you have interruptions that happen even during the pandemic that were sort of interruptions within the interruptions. Whether it's the Suez Canal interruption where we had sort of 9.6 billion in trade that got interrupted, to issues that were happening because of different types of disruptions. So you had trade restrictions, you had restraint on demand, meaning people couldn't get to health services, so you couldn't deliver them, and you have and still have transport disruptions. So I think it's important to, there are a bunch of different problems there that we can start to break down in this session and look at what were some of the causes. But the bottom line is that at some point, about half of the world's health systems and health services were disrupted, whether it was stuff from emergency care all the way to rehab services and mental health and substance abuse counseling. So that was one type of disruption of the health service that was there. The supply chains that service those health services were part of the reason, but only part of the reason. And the types of things that were disrupted for vaccines were really wide ranging. There are raw materials to filters that are used in manufacturing to large plastic bags for bioreactor lining. So it's a big, wide range of supply chain disruptions.
You bring up a good point. I mean, one of the things that we've seen here too is how different countries that dealt with it. So let's look into different countries. How did they address this disruption in the supply chain?
Yeah, I mean, major like the disruptions in the supply chain, people got handled them in different ways. You had some countries that are producer countries, like in India or China, that basically put on export restrictions and said, okay, look, we've got supply chain restraints and transport issues, so we're shutting down and keeping stuff domestically. And you've got other countries that are receiver countries that didn't have that luxury and have started to move to other possibilities. So, like, for instance, if you look at in many countries right now, just around syringes, that's one of the areas that I'm worried about. You are seeing, even with a push in manufacturing, which has definitely come around syringes, we will probably, unless something drastic happens, be about 5 billion syringes short over the life of the pandemic. We're doing somewhere between 14 billion to 19 billion injections, more than we've ever done in the history of vaccination campaigns. And our ability to scale up is difficult. So the idea that you're just going to add capacity, there's some give in the system, but most of those systems are set up to operate where they're operating. So some countries have started to procure locally. That's been another solution in addition to just restricting. And the third possibility is that you just borrow Peter to pay Paul. Again, taking syringes as an example, you can see childhood vaccinations have fallen way down because syringes and other resources are being used for COVID.
One of the things that I think we have to, you brought up, that is, in that we've been down this path once or twice, all right? And so obviously this is not something new. So, I mean, did we or did we not learn? What did we learn in the past? You see what I'm saying? I mean, we didn't get anything, or what? Were we asleep?
Yeah, well, I've been like probably the same way. Like, there have been so many times in this pandemic where I've been scratching my head thinking, I can't be the only one in the world that is realizing what's happening here. But our capacity for making decisions seems to know no bounds these days, and people are in many cases sort of government, political, and private sector leaders are making decisions that are not necessarily based on collective outcome. But if you let's take Ebola. No, let's go back to SARS and another influenza outbreak. There was a big push around the issues of access to vaccines at the time, and also the need for local production. And there was investment made in a bunch of different places. You take South Africa or a few other countries, but it never really got off the ground for two reasons. For instance, one was the technology transfer wasn't appropriately facilitated, and secondly, people didn't think enough about the market. It was just like, let's supply stuff, but they didn't think through, which sounds crazy to the folks we're going to be talking to at INTERPHEX, but the public health people didn't think enough about that there has to be sufficient sustained demand for this. And that's happening with personal protective equipment also. So anyway, one of the lessons is that much more thought needs to be given to local manufacturing, and the idea that you then within your supply chain need to map it out. You need to look at where are your vulnerabilities. Are you depending on one supplier? Are you depending on one region uniquely for certain key parts of your production process? So I think that's another piece that we didn't learn enough from both SARS and from Ebola. But you have to say, I mean, COVID, it's quite unprecedented in terms of its scope. So we're learning all sorts of new things with this outbreak.
So yeah, let's stick with that, because it's, that leads us right up into where we want to go here. And that is, so what are the biggest opportunities in the coming year to build up a resilient supply chain? I mean, what's the first couple of steps we got? I mean, immediately people think bricks and mortar, and there's got to be more to it. It sounds to me like there's got to be a lot of political, make sure we get all these things ironed out. Why don't you give us your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think, some of the biggest opportunities, and we can delve more into it, but is really on this idea of public-private partnerships. Anyway, I've been on the public side for a long time. I work for the U.S. government, work for HHS, and I work for USAID in West and North Africa, Latin America, and then for WHO. So anyway, a lot of work on the public side. And if you look at, we spend $8 trillion every year on healthcare. Most of that actually comes from governments, like probably about, between 5 and 6 trillion comes from governments. So we need to help government think more innovatively and in a more resilient way. A lot of companies, because they have strong incentives to be in a better position for the next outbreak, have already done this thinking. A lot of governments have not done that thinking. So I think there's one aspect there that's not just about the production you're going to have, but helping the partnerships that you are engaged with, both locally and more globally. Secondly, I think we have to realize that things are not going to change just because disruptions in our supply chain have driven up the cost of producing what we produce. Consumers are not necessarily going to pay more for it, depending on what it is, obviously. We won't be able to charge more for it necessarily because competition gets in and ensures that we're not able to do that. So I think there's an opportunity for us to look at more efficient ways of producing, new ways of again, I come back to this idea of syringes. With ApiJect, we've looked at, moving beyond glass vials, moving into new production processes like blow, fill, seal, and other ways of being innovative and producing at volume.
I think just looking at the way your career has evolved. I mean, it went from the public sector and WHO, now you're at ApiJect. And so why don't you give us obviously, where do you see the private sector building up a robust public health system here?
Yeah, I think if I come back to my example that was given earlier about in earlier pandemics, how vaccine production really didn't take off. There's an opportunity if we look across the supply chain for building more resilient supply chains and more resilient manufacturing systems without just looking at the end product. So if we're going to just stay on vaccines for a moment, everyone is focused on bulk vaccine and bulk vaccine production as an opportunity for the private sector to step in. But you're basically taking the most complicated and most sort of tech and knowledge-driven piece of the process as your opportunity. But if you work back, there are other parts of the manufacturing, the supply chain that can be done locally. Give countries opportunities to control that locally. That would be things like fill finish and others. We have some partnership work with in Kenya and Ghana, working with the German government and other private sector partners to look at how you could do some of that production fill finish capacity in a more local setting. And the world is very, very different now. You have the ability for much more modular production. You have capacity that is far beyond what you used to have in places like East and Southern Africa, and then in Southeast Asia and other places. So I think that for the private sector, the only other piece that I would mention, this is a bit more sort of like values driven and metaphysical, is that we need to be thinking about bringing value to the relationships that we're having, and not just thinking about the value we're pulling from it, but that a lot of thought leadership sits in the private sector, and a lot of solutions during COVID times came out of the private sector. So let's work together to offer that up in a context of creating better production and greater sales and all, but specifically coming with a values-based or creating more value for both governments and customers.
You bring up a good point, and that was the aspect between bulk and the fill finish. And I know Rob and Paul, they've gone through this. A lot of times, we get involved with firms, and they kind of like forget that part. So, you don't sell things in a handy dandy 100-liter cryovac container, I mean, to me, that part could be centralized, and the fill finish, that could be distributed, that could be across many countries. But anyway, let's talk about that. So we hear a lot about building back better. Is this part of what you're talking about?
Yeah, I think, that piece of it is a big piece of it, is looking at where and what we're going to build with a more critical eye. And I think there's very unrealistic unrealistic thinking that happened in previous outbreaks about building local capacity and decentralizing manufacturing capacity, and really not thinking about the financially sustainable ventures that would come out of this and the overall market. Now, by the same token, there's a lot of pushback around production issues where companies are reluctant to get into, again, going back to personal protective equipment and others, because of the idea that in the near future that'll be production build that won't be used. So I think you can't defeat yourself before you've started, but I think we need to think critically about how we have immediate needs, how those immediate needs were sort of gaps that we created for ourselves because we weren't prepared before. And that's really the build back better. People use that term a lot, and it basically means sort of, in many contexts, here's how I get my agenda back on the table because it disappeared during COVID. That's not what we're talking about. We're really talking about how do we avoid the supply shutdowns that we had in this COVID outbreak.
I got it, Ed. So, I think this brings us to a point, Jim, where I think, from speaking to the private sector to manufacturers, it's how is the coronavirus pandemic, how's that affected the supply chain security? I mean, that's got to be the other piece. I mean, there's a lot more to it than just getting this stuff there. I mean, it's got to get there intact and all the rest of it. Why don't you give us your take on that, Jim?
I think, and a lot of that answer that I'll provide here from a thought process perspective, Ed actually even touched on some of the stuff that he was talking about. But to me, when it comes to supply chain security, especially in the pharmaceutical sector, I think we got over the course of, let's just call it the last 10 years, I think we got very good as an industry in the private sector, looking at security issues, whether it's counterfeiting, diversion, last mile theft, whatever it might be. I think we got very good at monitoring that. I think we've gotten better at mitigating it but part of that process, in my mind, over the last 10 years, and 10 years leading up to the pandemic, we got very good at it. But I think, to maybe use a little bit of a bad term, but I'll say it anyway, I think we got good but complacent, and we were focused yet complacent. I think what the pandemic has put us in the mindset of around supply chain security is we become hyper focused. And what I don't want to see is that hyper focus go away, because then we fall back into the traps that maybe routine kind of put us in. You know, the other thing that I thought was really important that Ed said, which I think really dovetails to the security piece of this too, when it comes to supply chain, is interaction between public and private sector. I see on a daily basis collaboration amongst private organizations on best practices. I think it's really important to pull the public entities into those conversations, and even for public entities to have cross-functional conversations with other countries. I think, you know, in one of your questions was, how have different countries looked at this? Well, I think that's part of the challenge, is we ask those questions in a silo. Hey, how did your country do this? How did your country do this? How did your company do this? And we need to look at it more from an international collaborative type of situation, not just a private silo or a public silo. It's got to be more collaborative and joint.
I get it. So let me. So while we're on that topic, one of the things that the pharma sector got hammered on in a couple of spots was quality. Right? Yeah, I'm making the stuff. I'm going. I got an emergency approvals, and oops, I got to reject the stuff. I mean, so pharma quality. How is that? How are you going to handle that? Auditing and stuff like this.
So that was actually when the pandemic, even, you can classify it, there's so many dates that people kick around when the pandemic started. But I think when we started in the private sector on the quality side, we started to get inklings of the kind of moments where we're kind of like, hey, we've gotten really good at maintaining our quality on pharmaceutical products over the years, again, kind of like security. But now all of a sudden we go into not only a hyper-focus mode, but a what do we do mode, because I can't hop on an airplane and go to Taiwan and audit a factory over there that's producing some raw material that we have for our product. How do we do that? And I think that the industry very quickly pivoted to a remote model that I think really checked the quality boxes, maybe not the same as on-site, because you can always obviously do a lot better on-site. But I've seen the industry in the last year really kind of embrace the idea of auditing for quality of materials in a remote manner more than it ever has. I actually don't see that going away as we come out of the pandemic. My challenge to the industry is, again, don't get complacent, because remote auditing, if it's going to be part of our menu now moving forward on a quality end, how do we get better? How do we continue to improve the model? Because that is something I worry about. When you talk about stressing supply chains, like Ed just talked about in a minute, it dovetails to the quality end. I even, not like anybody's doing it on purpose, but just the fact that the supply chains are stressed, the manufacturing capabilities are stressed, that leads to the potential of quality issues. I mean, just take a look at the standpoint, and I think Ed touched on it, but I want to take it a step further, is, the idea of capacity. Is you might look at one plant that was, their main source of production was putting together, cancer therapies, cancer pharmaceuticals. And all of a sudden that same supplier is now being asked to, wait a minute, we need 2 of your lines to start producing vaccines. All of a sudden you see that vaccine production go up, and you see potentially access to these cancer medicines go down. And so it becomes an access issue, but it also becomes a bandwidth issue when you look at those people that are working in those facilities. All of a sudden, you're also going from maybe running 2 8-hour shifts to running 2.5-hour 8-hour shifts. It stressed the entire system. And I think that's where we need to get together more, again, since Ed's the only one to talk before me, to get together and think about those collaborative opportunities to share best practices and to be more forward thinking. Let's not wait for those mistakes to happen or wait for those bandwidth issues to happen. We need to be having these conversations now. And I know in some environments we are, so I don't want to limit what people are doing. But I think you go from discussions and conversations about alarms to let's put these things in place collaboratively, just not in silos.
Well, I think one of the things that have come up in several of our panels is the new norm coming out of this is going to be remote auditing, remote filing, remote for FDA visitation. They are actually, they're requesting documentation at a level, it was always there, but now they've pressed that button, where they're actually auditing the company. We went through this. We had a panel on, what's new in the area of audits. And I think that's one of the things that's going to be going forward is the remote aspect. I think that is going to be one of the new paradigms, and that will be towards increasing the quality, whether it's remote. It's going to be remote. It's going to the quality increase because we've seen this kind of stumble and fall a couple of times during this pandemic. I mean, not great. So let me ask you this question: how can industry then work more collaboratively towards the pharma quality? I mean, where do you see us going there?
I'm going to use it in regards to what you just mentioned about remote auditing. Remote auditing, and sometimes I tend not to use the term new normal. It's normal. It's kind of how we're doing business, and I don't think it's going away. And when you look at it from an auditing perspective, and to use the example you gave, where we talk about the remote auditing, I call on the industry right now to collaboratively. These organizations have a tremendous amount of opportunities to share best practices. And when you look at remote auditing, one of my worries is that the audit checklists or standards that we audit quality to in today's world were built upon the foundation of an on-site audit, somebody going on site at that facility and doing an audit. Now, all of a sudden, we've moved to this remote model that, again, not going away. It's not going to be 100% remote, but we're going to do remote audits moving forward forever. I call on the industry right now to think about the best practices that you've installed at your own pharmaceutical organization on how you've done those remote audits, what's worked, what hasn't, and start retrofitting those audit checklists to the remote model, because there's certain things that you're going to do. Come up with some different standards that are equally, can be transitioned over to the remote model from the on-site audit model. But look at the remote model and say, how do we need to beef this up to make sure that we're not missing anything on the quality? That's one of my worries is, let's not fall into the trap when it comes to pharmaceutical auditing of the remote model skipping steps. I think we went through a phase a few years ago with the on-site audit where quality became questioned. I'm not saying that there were mistakes or anything like that, but quality became questioned because the on-site audits maybe were starting to lose their specificity. I had one person say to me one day, very simply, that an on-site audit is becoming coffee and donut time. And we need to make sure that doesn't happen. We need to kind of, again, go from experienced and focused, not fall into complacency, but really remain hyper-focused. And it's going to take some more resources. I think that's the other piece of it is I see this across the spectrum with all organizations when it comes to this remote auditing, this quality issue, supply chain security. Is bandwidth is stretched, and we as private organizations and public entities need to start looking at up resourcing to make sure that we are crossing the T's and dotting the I's.
Hey, Jim, I think you bring up a couple of good points. I mean, obviously, it's security. It's, again, I think a lot of times it's about the personnel and, do I have the right people? And I think the key being is that one of the things that was brought up again in a couple of panels that we've already had was that maintaining a workforce was very tough. The other thing, and it comes back down to bricks and mortar. Okay. And, Rob and I have spoken about this over the years. There's been this, gee whiz, there's a cap on the capacity. This is only so much we can be made. Well, guess what? We got around that by coming up with more flexible processing. But let's talk about it for a bit, Rob. So, as opposed to building new facilities, in response to this, that's right away everybody's out. We got to build more, make more. Is it possible to economically maintain excess capacity and in a sufficient state of readiness? In other words, can we build up an arsenal? Can we get this ready? How would we go about something like that?
Yeah, thanks, Russ. That's a good question. I think what we've seen here in response to the pandemic is everybody wanted to rush out and build a new fill finish facility. Okay. And unfortunately, with the lead time for equipment and to be able to plan and design a new facility. So the building and qualification interval is typically, at a minimum 2 years. That's really world-class or best case. It's more often 3 to 4 years before you can build a facility and qualify the facility to manufacture new drug product. Okay. So, that model as a potential response to, ramping up production capacity for pandemic just really doesn't work. Okay, you're going to need to have capacity installed somewhere, and it's going to have to be a hot capacity, we call it hot, or at least a warm capacity that's ready to go, that can be ramped up to begin producing vaccines in, say, a 3 to 4 month interval. With this pandemic as well, we saw, surprisingly, the ability to develop a new vaccine product in a matter of months, right? So everybody was out there manufacturing product ahead of launch. So we were manufacturing 6, 7, 8 months after the pandemic, the genome was sequenced for it, right? So that was remarkably quickly compared to how fast we're typically able to move for this. So I think the question becomes then a little bit, how do you build a sustainable business model that allows you to have this excess capacity ready to go? Okay. And I think one of the solutions there is that some of the newer technologies, the isolation-based technology, the blow-fill-seal technology, is the ability to campaign production. Okay, so our industry is very much a batch-oriented industry. That model is proven to be, economically sustainable. You have a facility, you're going to make 4 to 5 batches every week, for example. In between batches, you turn around and you prepare for the next batch. Okay, so that really leaves quite a bit of your production time fallow in that model. And if you have this sort of capacity installed, then being able to switch from that batch-wise production model to a continuous production model where we fire the lines up now, we run these things, 24/7, basically making pandemic can, almost instantly increase your production capacity by a factor of 3 or 4. And we see something similar to that in the flu industry right now with the syringe fillers we mentioned before that Ed talked about. The guys making flu have to make a lot of flu vaccine. They have to make it very quickly. Okay. So the norm there is that they've qualified and validated these systems for campaign mode operations where they're able to go in and begin manufacturing, and they can continue manufacturing for, say, up to 28 days continuously and make a lot of product doing that.
I think the other thing that you brought up that's, I think, people think that, I've developed it and I just take it out of the lab, walk it over, throw it in the facility, and I'm off to the races. And I think one of the things that we suffer from, what the tech transfer, we got to move the products. It just, even from, an existing product from facility to facility, how do you, when you implement in regional facilities, I mean, what's the challenges there? I mean, why don't we go through some of that?
Yeah, we did quite a bit of work recently with the Bill and Melinda Foundation. I hope I can mention them here on this. And exactly that, how do we make a regionally distributed manufacturing model for this? And a couple of things became, abundantly clear. One is the technical complexity, and you mentioned before drug substance being technically complex, and even on the drug product side, aseptic product manufacturing to today's standards is a tremendously complex operation. Okay, so one of the things we took a look at there was, again, these certain technologies, again, back to blow, fill, seal, where you've really eliminated a lot of that complexity simply by virtue of the fact that you've really concentrated the production operation into a single machine. Okay, so the machine itself is technically complex, but you've eliminated, 7 or 8 other machines, for example. And on the isolator side, we're seeing more and more manufacturers now that are beginning to produce really truly integrated systems. Okay, kind of plug and play models. So you can purchase a small machine. It's relatively easy to install, and all the bits and pieces that you need are there. So there's a good deal more, control system integration and that sort of operation for it. And it speeds, your implementation time and your qualification time as well.
Yeah, so that, I see where you're going. So that gets back, there's the drug product. And of course, I think people forget there's the drug product, which is the thing you deliver, and there's the drug substance. That's the vaccine and both. So, so let me ask you a simple question. So which is the best to regionalize, the drug product delivery or the, or the drug substance manufactured? What do you think is the best approach there?
For me, I think we need to be successful here. And as Ed mentioned before, issues with transferring to certain areas or regions, the technical complexity really has been the stumbling block for it. So I think there's technical complexity. There's also logistic complexity. Okay, these things logistically are tremendously complex as well, because you have to deliver literally hundreds or possibly thousands of articles to site to be able to manufacture a drug product or a drug substance. So how do we pull that whole supply chain effort together so we can reliably do that for it? So I think really part of it is going to be, as Ed mentioned before, having this, private government partnership to provide the assistance necessary here. I know that in a lot of these regions, they feel like they're taking a back seat. Whereas in the developed countries now, we've got a vaccine supply. Our populations are relatively well vaccinated. Whereas, for them, there's really little hope of getting, sufficient quantities of vaccine for some period of time yet. So I think they'd like to be in control of that. So I think it just needs to be something where we come up with a plan that's going to be patient. We have to understand it's going to take a number of years to develop the logistic capacity for it, as well as the technical capacity to manufacture either one, and then move forward with a test operation that allows them to become successful for it. We did also look at a model where you would have a pilot facility, essentially, and you would set that up in the EU or the US or some other relatively developed region for that. And then you would simply be able to instantiate then or just duplicate that facility regionally. That hub facility then could become a training center for people on a regional basis. So they can send, select the teams of people they would like to have operate the facility. They can send them all into this training center. And then, the more we can stick to keeping it the same, then things like, qualification documentation is able to transfer, SOPs are able to transfer, right? The technology transfers. So, again, that simplifies the task as well.
Yep. I agree with you 100%. They're right. One of the things that, we did, during my time in pharma before was that, we kept things the same. The key being that we had the same process no matter where we dropped it. Again, a globally based company. One of the things was, you don't want to look at change. So let me ask you this question. And I think this is one of the things we want to get out there. So it changes to the drug product, the dosage form, or are they required? In other words, the way we do things now, there's something need to be done to ensure alignment. When we get into this pandemic, oh my God, we got to manufacture the stuff and increase capacity. What kind of corrective steps could we possibly take where we don't make that process or fill mistake? How do we act? How do we proactively give ourselves that regional aspect by, there are changes in the way we do business, or the changes in the way we develop, or what?
I think if I'm getting your question right here, anyway, I think we saw mostly with the, the vaccine distribution, the current world model seems to be, more or less a 10-dose vial, lyophilized and/or liquid in the case of the more current RNA vaccines, is really the model here for it. And in terms of optimizing fill finish capacity, that does it for you too, because I've got a machine that runs, say, 400 vials per minute. I can make maybe 400 unit doses for that. Or the same machine might run at 300 vials per minute if I'm filling 10 dose. Okay, so now I'm making 3,000 doses a minute. So obviously, the multi-dose format leverages now our production capacity for it. Now that said, the folks over at ApiJect with the blow fill seal technology, we're able really to come up with equipment that would have, a similar very high-end production capacity, but able to deliver in a unit dose format. Okay. And as Ed, having worked with the WHO and other organizations, really understands, I'm sure, all the issues associated with the multi-dose, product format for vaccines, especially in developing countries and regions of the world. So, ideally, it would be unit dose. I don't know if we're going to be able to come to some agreement moving forward about what we think the next, dosage is going to look like. Is it going to be a 10-dose vial? Is it going to be a unit dose syringe, that kind of thing, so that we can better prepare for that?
I think that's something that we have to look at. And quite honestly, as a tech guy, to me, I would focus on the unit dose delivery. But okay, fine, But okay, so there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff people ask. Paul, one of the things we wanted to get into was, we weren't prepared for this. I mean, we talk about this like we've been down the road about 100 times, but, let's face it, everybody feels that we got, we had SARS, we had, a couple other outbreaks. We got caught flat-footed here. What went down?
Personally, I think, as you said, everybody was very much kind of concerned with their own facilities and what they were making at the moment, and, very busy. Most clients were extremely busy. With their own products. And I think when it came out first, I thought people got the impression it was only a flu. It wasn't that serious. I think there was a lot of media kind of both, one kind of expanded it, say it was very serious. Other people say not so serious, and it became political, became very political here, not so much in other countries. So I think that was one of the big aspects of it. Nobody really took it seriously. I think, and the fact as well that SARS, in a way, it was a very serious disease and people died very quickly, didn't spread as quickly as it did, because COVID is much different. It'll stay in your body, you'll live, but you'll spread it a lot more. So I think that kind of caught everybody off guard. And I think, as you say, the drug itself was produced pretty fast, but then with the whole clinical side of things to get it approved, then you had the whole question of how do we actually get it out the door, basically. And the certain companies that did that. I was involved with one of them, and again they had to change their whole manufacturing process, and basically they had to expand an area, and it was all part of the whole warp speed thing where we got permitting done so quickly. We got construction, we got everybody on board day one, and everybody knew exactly what the game plan was, from the client right down to the guy who was fitting the clean room together and putting the equipment in. But because everybody was on the one page. So I think, the lesson learned that I got from all of that basically is we can do this, no problem. But everybody has to be lined up, and there's no room for anybody, we need flexibility in the future, or we need to do that. For a product like this, you need to be very, very cold in what you actually want to deliver. And the client that I worked with, we did that. They knew exactly what we wanted. Everybody was on board, and we delivered it in record time.
I think you bring up a great point. One of the other question, one of the things one of the things we've always been aware of when I was in development was our objective was, if need be, we could launch the clinical form. We didn't have to come up with a final market image. That was the key. So having said that, how do you design, build, and how do you build a drug manufacturing facility like that? We did it simply, in other words, our pilot plant was identical to our tech ops plant. So how do you design and build what do you see coming up to help this along?
Flexibility, huge.
Yeah.
Even any clinical facility that we design right now, it's always in the back of the client's mind that we can launch eventually from this site. So we designed, from a cleanliness perspective to, from modularity to flexibility, it's all included. You get the client on board early. What do you want? How much flexibility do you want? What's the future for this? People are not just designing now for a little pocket of something. There's a much more open-minded view of what the facility needs to be because of these pandemics that they're going to come again, and you need to be ready. And as I said, we all got caught, right? Nobody was really ready for this. So I think lots of clients now look at flexibility. How can we transfer this facility that we have inside in this campus? How can we reinvent this for the future? Lots of clients are looking at master planning all their sites now, right? And seeing what's ready and how can we adapt for the future, because there's a big market out there for it for when it comes. So we need to be ready. So again, it's master planning. It's seeing what the capability of your site right now. I think looking for a new site and building a new facility, that's one way of doing it, but it takes a long time. If you have something, that's already there, or you have an area of a building that's fallow, whatever, you can move warehousing out of there and put production in there, and you can offsite warehousing. That's the things that people are looking at right now. They're looking at flexibility, basically.
One of the things I learned from Rob and working with the guys in biotech was, we've used that with a lot of people in the small molecule area, was you don't scale up, you scale out. You clone your process. In other words, if the process is doing 100,000 and it's working great, don't make it 1 million. You make another process line that does 100,000. A lot simpler, a lot faster. Yeah. So, but having said that, one of the things that we've always seen was guys go to town building an inventory for a launch. Do you really think overstocking drug supplies is the right approach to this?
Well, again, you're cornered into one market on the drug supply that you have. We don't know what the next virus is going to be. Or the big, if there is another pandemic or whatever. So yeah, you're harboring all of this. Yeah, for flu vaccine, I can understand that because it's every year, right? How this COVID thing plays out, we don't know yet. Maybe we do all need a new shot every year eventually. Who knows? So yeah, you can stockpile for certain drugs, or certain problems, but you won't be able to stockpile for everything. So you have to have you can do it for one, but you have to have the flexibility and the readiness for another one coming through, I think.
But so a couple of things that Jim brought up was the quality aspect, the remote piece. I think we're getting to that point. But let me ask you this: should every country, within reason, of course, should every country be self-sufficient to respond? In other words, should we be thinking about putting these facilities in every country? What do you think?
Not necessarily every country, but every country has to have a link to another country that can provide it for them. Everybody's going to have to work in partnerships behind the scenes. Like I've done a lot of work with Canada. They got caught as well, right? And now that they're getting ready for the next bit. The US is pretty good shape. We're probably in the best shape here, right? And then India was pretty good. They came up. China got their own vaccine together. But I think even I'm from Ireland originally. Ireland had to wait in turn until the Pfizer vaccine got there. And they have a whole lot of pharma in that area. But it's just they need to build up partnerships with the suppliers, right? Because some countries can't afford it, and they don't have the industry in that country. So you're going to have to come up with a partnership with a country nearby and be ready. Like Europe got caught badly, a lot worse than we did. I think, they're still, it's improving, but I think, I think there's a lot of work to be done behind the scenes with all these different countries to sort out for any future one. And it's not just third world countries; it's even first world countries need to sort it out because it's the future and we have to be ready for it.
I think some of these partnerships and alliances that we talk about, I think we have to be careful. I mean, you can go too fast. I mean, and invite a catastrophe. What do you think there?
Yeah, exactly. I think, I think there are partnerships, but you need to know your partner. There was a lot of rushing. There was a lot of, suppliers, getting somebody else to fill the product for them, all over the planet. And I think that needs to be dry. There was no dry run. It was straight into it, right? We had to get the product to market. So, here you go. This is it. Fill it. package it, get it out the door. And I think, yeah, it's the right thing to do, but I don't think for a lot of these partnerships, I don't think there was a dry run. I don't think people checked the quality protocols, as we spoke about earlier on. And all that needs to be nailed down. I mean, Jim brought that up earlier. And that, for the future, I think, you need to have a partner and you need to know, one or two, because you can't just rely on one. And you have to do due diligence with all of these people, and they have to do it with you. So everybody's ready for when we do it again.
So Ed, having listened to this, our panel folks here, I mean, let's go back, let's come around full circle. I mean, stepping back from your ApiJect, I mean, put your former life back in perspective here. What do you think? I mean, obviously we've had the bad partnerships, the alliances, the quality piece. Let's face it. I mean, we're not going to get into specifics, but we've seen a lot of, some major companies go down the sewer a little bit here with the, screw ups and qualities. And so what do you think? What have we learned based on all this conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I think that with great points by Jim, Paul, and Rob, that it's quite clear that again, this point that we came to, the public-private investment, that a big push, and Paul was just saying this. One of the reasons the U.S. was in such a good shape was a big push by the U.S. government and public money to get stuff off the ground and guarantee a market, guaranteed delivery, so that the risk management could be there for these companies to move on things. And the issue I think we didn't do a good job on was anticipating how far money can, how much money can buy. I mean, it can buy you a lot, but if India decides hey, sorry, we're closing the borders because we need to leave this stuff domestically until we figure out how bad this is going to get for us. All of a sudden, decision makers didn't know. I had so many policymakers, I could tell you, very prominent Swiss policymaker to folks in Germany, France, and the US, Canada, other places say, I never knew I had to care so much about supply chains. It was just like it's like the plumbing that's running, but then all of a sudden the entire world needed to flush the toilet at the same time, and all of a sudden things exploded. But it's really one of these issues that I hope we take away, that partnerships addressing these kind of nuts and bolts, the real skeleton of how we run our health systems, is going to be what we need. And then secondly, saying, well, what we went with what we had for the first phase. So we came earlier. That was, honestly, that's why we're in multi-dose vials. That's not the best way. It kills, WHO talks about this, it kills 1 million plus people a year because of syringe reuse and infections that they get. So we could have 2 to 3 million dead, piece we did earlier this year, based on if we just had peacetime numbers, not even concerned with the other strains. So I think we need to now take the brief pause that we have, and we're definitely not done with COVID, even though many of us, are magically wishing that it's gone away, to say, what are the innovations we need? I mean, not just for 5 years' time, but literally for the rest of this pandemic. So for 2022, 2023, for sure, that's around, in the vaccine world, that's around single dose pre-filled syringes. That'll be, and eventually the future of immunization, I'm sure. But that's also around these partnerships that we have in terms of the other parts of the supply chain.
Thanks, Ed. I think we've covered it. It sounds to me like the public sector, WHO's got their work cut out for them. I think we have a lot of knowledge. We have a lot of experience. I think we have to put it to work this time so that we don't get caught flat-footed. We've learned, and I think we got to ramp up. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Just for everybody to recount, there will be the INTERPHEX show October 19th through the 21st at the Javits Center. This video will be available on Reconnects 365, that along with all the videos we've done over the last few years, so that you can see how things have evolved and developed. I want to thank our speakers. I want to thank Jim, Ed, Paul, and Rob. Thank you very much, guys. Take care.